see the red light. Oh, there it is. I can even see it. Okay, I'd like to call the Parks and Rec Commission meeting to order for January 16th, 2025. It's 6 o'clock. Could we have a roll call?
Commissioners Ruig.
Here.
David.
Here.
Vice Chair Courtney.
Here.
And Chair Tencher.
Here.
All members are present.
Okay, I'd like to have everyone stand and we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, I'd like to have a motion to adopt the agenda, please.
I'll move the item.
Second.
All in favor? Do we?
Voice. Aye.
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 Any opposed? Adopted then. Approval of minutes from our September 19th, 2024 meeting. Does anyone have any changes, or may I have a motion to adopt the minutes?
I move to adopt the minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. Public comment on items not listed on the agenda. Did we receive any public comment for any reason? Okay. Seeing no public, then we will go ahead and move to the item 7, the administrative regular item, the Yountville Commons planning process update and design concept.
All right, I will do the introduction. If you can flip to the first process slide. I wanted to go back to September. Those of you remember, Brendan Kelly, our lead designer, I think you've all met, but that night he stood me up due to family issues, so I had to do the presentation when we were beginning the visioning process, and we had a number of members of the public here. I think there was a summary of kind of the things we talked about. The timing was good because you had, I think 6 months prior, adopted the Park and Rec master plan, and the council had adopted that. So it was a great reference to sort of be able to build on, and we started kind of gathering input, and now the intent is to do what I'm calling another lap through the advisory groups, which starts with you. Next will be the Measure S Committee, which is affordable workforce housing. Then you'll have the ZDRB, the Planning Commission, that can talk in general terms. And finally, the goal is to be back in front of the Town Council on March 4th for conceptual approval, which in essence is adopting a vision, putting us into kind of the regulatory planning phase, where we then have to go and do all the technical work that's going to be needed. Good news is we're on schedule, we're on budget. A lot of people are talking about the interim uses, Yountville Fit in particular. On February 4th, we're going to have a big celebration for the 60th anniversary. The Schmidt Hall has been open, but will be formally open. The farm stand is the one that's lagging a little bit, and that's actually for good reason. We're kind of deciding April. May is probably the right time to actually open that. It might be open for the February thing just to show it, but we've made improvements in all these cases. We've fulfilled our commitment on the interim uses, and this evening it's really to talk about the vision, which is kind of the long term. So you see the model that I want to thank Brendan, and his wife Carrie Morgan actually is in the audience too. They have a 3D printer that has created this really great tool that helps you visualize what we're intending to do. And the final thing I will say is, as you know, your role is to advise the council. I don't anticipate the need for any votes. We're going to take all of your comments and move them forward. If you do feel like there's an issue maybe you disagree on, we can either kind of do a straw poll where it's like, hey, show of hands, who agrees with Myrna, or so forth. Or if you feel, and this is obviously discretion of the chair, that we need a vote because, hey, this is an issue, maybe a 2-2 thing, feel free to do that. But I think the intent really is to gather general feedback, talk about things specific to park, rec, and open space, and provide that to the council for their March 4th discussion and deliberation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brendan for his presentation.
Okay, we're going to go quickly because we want to get to conversations. And I'm in the understanding business, and tonight I want to understand from you what you see, what you don't see, and make sure that you're aware of the process that's happened since September. I've met with a number of you individually during our office hours. We've met with over 110 or 120 people so far just in our over 75 appointments on Saturday mornings and on Tuesday mornings. And that map right over there actually shows the distribution of the residents that have come to see us, whether it's an open house or at our appointments. And Carrie and I tried to make sure that we were afraid that it was only going to be like a small section of Yountville that would sort of like weigh in. And we're very relieved that it's all over town. All tribes of Yountville are represented in terms of like who've come to talk to us. But we're going to go quickly through the deck.
May I ask, what are the different colors represented?
The different colors don't mean anything. We got a big stack of color, and I think it looked good. And maybe I'll start replacing them with bright pink ones so that it's actually a little easier to read. It's fun to get close and see if your neighbors actually sort of rolled through. Okay, here we go. We are, of course, now at the PRAC. This doesn't actually, the laser doesn't show up on these screens, but the big one? The middle one? Oh. Oh, there you go. Thanks, Sam. There you go. That's where we are. That's cool. I think I'm going to use that again tonight. I'm going to use this on my teenagers when I get home. Shine a little light. So we just talked about kind of joining the conversation. All of you guys all you are very aware of how widespread the net is, and of course we've heard from a ton of residents, and we've talked about the number of jobs in Yountville. We've talked about the mismatch of housing stock. We've talked about the multifamily zoning, even though it's a little skewed with things like the Veterans Home. Yountville looks good on paper, but outside of Hopper Creek and a few other smaller condo projects, it actually is entirely a community of single-family homes. And we're going to get into this because the single-family home proposal from the school district, which is what the basis for the purchase price was, is actually not going to solve the RHNA numbers or create a center in the center of Yountville. It would have been great for a developer, but the town has much higher, the highest and best use doesn't actually qualify for the town's general plan or the housing element for single family. This is the center of town. It is a 5-minute walk to Ranch Market for a quart of milk. It's a very rare thing in towns, even from Calistoga all the way to American Canyon, certainly throughout California. Many successful things are already in place in Yountville. There are a lot of there are already established approved policies in the housing element, the current housing element, and that is in your staff report. The RHNA number, 72, is now fairly well advertised between very low and to above moderate income. This is supposed to be housing for people who work in Yountville and can't afford to live in Yountville, although many of them obviously are coming for 30 minutes an hour commute, usually in a car by themselves. And we don't know, this is not for all of them, but it's definitely enough for a high percentage who would, of course, rather live here than live somewhere else. We went through a lot of different visual things early on in the project. These images up here in the far left, when you think of some of the models that you're talking about, the one in the upper left is actually some of the basis that where a lot of residents really were attracted to. We have another scheme in the upper right. That green check, all that means is that a lot of these images got a lot of high ratings from the residents in different meetings, both in group meetings and in private meetings. And we kept pretty good detailed notes about that. These did not. Even though these are handsome buildings, everybody's expecting at the center of Yountville more Yountville. And obviously this would look very strange at the center of Yountville. We've looked at Old Town densities. We've looked at the other end of the spectrum in the trailer park, like Rancho. And even though those are a wide range, we're going to have to do even more high density to preserve open space and parkland and still get some of the numbers that people are expecting. So what does that look like? It really looks like fourplexes. And this I know I'm not talking to my phone right now, Brad. You can see Arroyo Grande there on Fennell. Those are fourplexes. Everything else here are 3, 4, 5, 6plexes that we're showing tonight. All of the things here on Yount Street are also fourplexes, 2, 3 stories in a couple of places, but mostly all 2-story. We did not show you this last September. We did this actually as a result of that meeting because we needed a little more context of all the parks and recreational opportunities because they can't all be provided on this site with all the other things that are being required. You have a lot of things. You're commissioners on the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee. You don't need any explanations from me about what you have here, but this was a tool for us to go to the public and other people who want this, they want that. Hey, how can you fit this? And we were saying, the town of Yountville has a beautiful baseball field across the way. They have a beautiful museum. They actually have a beautiful community hall. There's a beautiful pickleball court. There's a beautiful playground. So this helped us both in listing it and graphically showing where the bike paths were, and especially the walking paths near the Hopper Creek, which is such a part of being a resident in Yountville. And we also described how people, residents and visitors, could both come to this site and leave this site on foot or on bike and understand where the commercial aspects of the site are, not just next to Bardesano, but all the way up Washington. And this is a diagram, again, in your report that shows that. It's a way for us to tell other people when someone says, hey, there's nothing near my house, and we can say, we can show them in a larger context. Those are just tools that we're using. So there's the site, and it's easy to there's a lot of memory, of course. I think tonight we did this sketch that shows right now, without anything changing, there's a little over 3 acres of what I would call open space, recreational space, green lawns, things where it rains and it actually goes into dirt and not onto asphalt or roofs. And that's an important number, I think, for all of us to remember when someone will say, well, you took away this and you took away that and you added that. And I think there's a baseline in terms of memory. One of the things that we found was, even though it's a recreational space, there's actually not that much connection to the public streets of Yountville on the way it's laid out right now. It's perfectly laid out for a school, of course, but not for something that's more integrated into town. So we have to start cutting this up. It's bound by a condominium and it's bound by the actual Hopper Creek. So it's not like a city block, and we have to make it more like a city block in terms of parking and other things, and still think about the open spaces that we can build and retain. And we'll get into that very quickly here. We went through with the town council, ZDRB, Measure S, all kinds of different ways. There's not some secret plan that got rolled out just in time. We went through and moved a lot of the open spaces, whether they're play fields or greens. We can look at things in a plan. There's nothing that's on this project that's changing the views down Fennell or down Yount Street in terms of the typical Yountville feeling of walking or biking or driving down streets with the tree covered and sun-dappled surfaces. So this is an example of the range of the site diagrams. The mayor was not impressed with my moving the historic landmark of this building over to the side or picking it up and moving it. So we've actually not pursued every single viable diagram for reasons like that. Not because the mayor likes historic buildings, but because it's a historic building, it's not really a viable solution. There's many, many attractive alternatives for this project, keeping this historic building right here. That's just one example. We ask at different meetings, Sunday dinners and different team meetings, what do you see, what do you not see? That is a question to you also tonight. This is, of course, where things started. It's technically what started it all. This is the 42 or 48 single-family homes. And the reason that we keep showing this is to remind the town and to remind all of us what instead is happening, because we still are going to have to do at least these number of units, if not more, plus the recreational space, plus the public buildings, plus all the other things. And just as a reminder, that's barely a half acre of open space compared to the three acres that are right there. So this was never viable, although, for reasons, and it sounds like I'm a broken record sometimes, but it's important to keep reminding the town over and over again, for us, what was an option and what the town did to take a fork in the road. And it's, again, not just about housing, but about these open spaces and how they're integrated. So that's the scheme. After I'm speeding up quite a lot, and you can see this scheme in this model right in front of you tonight. And you're seeing a lot of open space and a lot of housing. This is at least the 75 or 72 that the RENA number includes, plus the new fitness center, of course, the historic grammar school building that we're in, the Don and Sally Schmidt Hall, which of course was the old multi-purpose room for the school. There's the farm stand, and in these drawings, we're also showing the garden that's up in the left-hand corner, and probably a relocated dog park down here along Fennell that's closer to the farm stand, closer to parking, closer to the trail, or just as close to the trail, and just as accessible for everybody. We've talked to a number of people who love the dog park, but who would like it closer to where they can park comfortably. And there it is. That's the other diagram. That's just over 3 acres. So in this layout, that's the same amount of open space that currently sits in one big rectangle. And the reason we drew this is now you're seeing all of the connections along, not just along Fennell, but all along Yount Street is now, instead of parking in this scheme. Can I? Walk. It's at the opposite end, but we organized this model so that it's organized, to the axis of this building, so everybody can kind of find themselves. We drew a blue swim workout pool, especially for Commissioner Rick. There's a lot of people who love the idea of pools, and I think it being connected to a fitness organization that could take care of it is a big idea. We show these things as not just to sell them, but making sure that everyone understands sort of how it's laid out. This is the community garden that Peter Jacobson is just planted in the last few months. This is I can do this in 2 hands. This is that dog park along here on the south side of the current baseball field. The farm stand, of course, incorporated into an activity like that. But one of the biggest things for this scheme is all of the parking that's in front of the grammar school, that's in front of the town hall, that's in front of all of these former school buildings is now behind. There's 110 parking spaces in this scheme with over 75 units. As a comparison, Bardesano has 65 parking spaces for 62 suites. And So there's a lot more parking. Of course, this is a residential neighborhood, not a hotel, but it's roughly, the same size, same sort of like bulk and things, although it's focused on different things. But it's important to kind of compare it to the two big parcels on either side. Instead of 6 or 7 curb cuts, this only has one curb cut here on Fennell and another curb cut here, exactly where that parking exit is off of Yount. There's a lot of electrical and other things, and mostly it's a beautiful garden that Peter's done, and the street ends into these recreational and open space pieces instead of cars or more streets. Is a big part. So the park, even though we've taken the open space and kind of pulled it apart to incorporate it into the housing and the other public spaces, whether it's a gym or a hall or this town hall function. This is a fourplex. You can see the scale of these other fourplexes. It's a little taller because we're taking advantage of the third story in some of these places. It's a little shorter, but they're fewer. There are no 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom units. These are mostly studio and 1-bedrooms. The state doesn't care if it's a studio or 1-bedroom versus 3 bedrooms. And like we talked about, Napa County, most of California is mismatched between the 1.8 person households and the 3.4 bedroom houses. We need more smaller units, which developers don't like doing because they don't make a lot of money.
I got your clicker. I also got your timer.
Oh, look at that, 15 minutes, just like I promised, Commissioner.
Yeah, I got your clicker if you wanted to.
Oh, thank you, yeah. All right. So that's the model. We have you can see some of these street level or eye level schemes. That's the farm stand, of course, there on the left. And we're gonna show tonight there is a phased program. Many residents have talked to us about it's important to leave more room. If you plan for success, you have to be able to say, like, hey, this is so successful, we need to be able to add another 20 or 30%. So we actually have a scheme that we'll show you that fits in that ball field section right there. This is the second scheme. We're not going to build it out tonight just because of the time and the kind of complication of taking one model off or one model on. But the point that we're trying to make is that both schemes that we're showing have the same kind of acres. The 3 acres of open space is kind of our touchstone. And it can be organized in different ways. This is the one with the library still there. There's a lot of the alternatives that we're bringing to the town council are a result of a lot of meetings where everybody wants alternatives. They don't want just one solution that people are chasing. They want to be able to kind of have a lot of flexibility and adaptability around the school site, whether it's Parks and Rec or housing or the other sort of civic pieces. And here, these are more street views, the entrances, these woonurfs that are, it's a Dutch term. And this is a 4-story version of a woonurf just completed in North Carolina. We are not talking about buildings that tall, but the concept of these lived paved spaces where you can access but not park, and they're not really roads. You can imagine kids and other sort of neighbors using these kind of in-between spaces. There's a picture of the ball field. The ball fields being sort of with room for housing on them. Some of the more tighter versions. The second scheme is a little tighter, allowing for larger single parkland or open spaces. That's looking down Yount Street with the town hall on the right. There's town hall. There's the community church at the other end of Yount Street, and that's the picture of the other scheme with it built out. And in both schemes, the built out scheme is probably 110 units with 110 parking spots, very similar to the Arroyo Grande 1 parking spot per unit or per bedroom. you can see this caused some confusion on Sunday, but everybody liked it when they finally sort of saw it. That's really the scheme that you're seeing right now laid out on the model. This is with the baseball field filled with housing and a full build out. This is the other village scheme with the ball field open, and this is the other scheme with the entire field, with the entire site filled with 110, 115 units. And that's it.
Okay. I want to add a couple little things, and then obviously we can answer any clarifying questions. And then, the staff report sort of asks you to focus on the baseball field, park and rec elements, and then finally consistency with the master plan and any other long-term plans. I think a couple things I would add that I think are important to think about, because I've heard since I got to town this idea of what I started calling civic storefronts, but we've also referred to it in the general plan as resident serving retail. And it's a big discussion, right, of like the things we used to have and what happened to them. And the cobbler, I joke about like the blacksmith and the cobbler as kind of old school things, but it's one of it was the gym, right? I mean, that we've at least solved that short-term problem. But you have a lot of issues where you think about, hey, these are things residents need. I do think he makes the point, at least recreationally, we have more almost than we need. But I think from a retail or a civic standpoint, the plan that is the one on the top left, does show buildings that are more dense than what's shown on the model, with the idea that there could be an arcade at the lower level. We could integrate civic storefronts. There could be that opportunity. And so I think that's something I just want to say out loud so that we're thinking about it. The other thing I would say when you think about open space and, what's not shown, at least as when he filters back the acreage, is the parking lots. And I think we have talked, and I do believe you see here this opportunity. You coined the term at one time, like a parking orchard. Is that what you called it? But the point is, you can have permeable, you can have parking lots that are designed, not necessarily, it's not going to be a park where you're playing, but you can have bike paths going through them, pedestrian paths. I mean, I kind of point to the estate, like that little arbor that you can go, from the marketplace over to Villaggio. Like, that's a beautiful little path, right? And you see people using it all the time to walk their dogs and what have you. So even though the parking lot isn't technically open space, I think if we're smart about how we design the parking lots, they can be part of that fabric as well. I think that's really something, at least for me, is important because, parking is the third rail of any discussion, but there are different ways. And then finally, what's not in here, which I've been preaching from the day one also, is this opportunity for one mobility, which does address parking. So how do we make this, more accessible for bikes and peds, et cetera, but also integrating whether it's a car share program, where there are cars, not only for residents that are living here or trucks, but also for the residents. Like, hey, if you need to come borrow a truck, there's many car share programs that could get people over the hump, including me, of having go from a 2-car household to a 1-car household. So I think those mobility ideas are things that integrate into all of these things. And then finally, energy resilience. We had meetings today. We are trying to be green and trying to be as sustainable as we can. Part of that is the environmental stuff like permeable pavers and, solar panels and all of those things. But I think ultimately to have a walkable village within a 5-minute neighborhood is this is the thing everyone's talking about. This is the future of development. And it's interesting how when, at least I talk about this, we talk about a little European village, right? And that's kind of what we're getting back. And that's the beauty of Yountville. We kind of already feel that way. But if we think of this property as kind of the heart of that, and we really, think about the places you've been. I just got back, from Rome and spent, a week in Trastevere and rented an apartment. It was such a great week, right? And you're just walking around these cool little areas that just breathe life. But it's, and there's very few things that are over 3 or 4 stories. It's like Paris, 3 or 4 stories, the whole thing in essence. So I think this is where, we want to talk about park and rec, but obviously the open space and how we integrate parking, all these things get connected. So I couldn't get the last word in. So
specifically about the parking is shown here, but one of the biggest things that Brad and others who are kind of on our team are like, hey, how do you walk across here? And one of our biggest goals is to be able to walk from this new kind of town green in front of the town hall, which is, right now a parking lot. It's not really a functional thing outside of storing cars, right? So how can you walk across here, but with a dog or with a kid or whatever, and keep walking all the way to the other corner and get on the Hopper Creek Trail, and you're really not ever crossing a road or crossing a parking lot or walking next to cars. And it's the same way with this scheme built on the baseball field. Whether there's a baseball field there or not, you can easily walk this way also and come back and back into town. So it's meant to be it's meant to feel like the center. And when you're here, you're like, oh, this is the center of town.
All right, thanks. So clarifying questions, then we can kind of get into more of direction and discussion.
Okay, so Lorene, would you please lead us off?
Yeah, I'm wondering with the green space that you've charted out, how accessible that's going to be. You're putting paths in there? Is it just going to be foliage? I mean, you tell us that it's open space, but how accessible really will it be?
Accessible in terms of like
Walking
ADA accessibility or more of like paths that lead into it?
Or just,
Accessibility is a very, it's a very clear word for architects. And I just want to make sure, I'm not trying to compete with you. I want to make sure that I understand what you mean by the word. So when I hear accessibility, I hear walkers, people who are in wheelchairs, people who are walking slowly, maybe with a cane, maybe somebody who's blind. That's what you're asking about, right?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I want to make sure that you're.
Well, my question is, you've charted all this open space, but how accessible, how realistic is it going to be? I'm just envisioning, it's open space, but it's a bunch of trees, or landscape, where you can't really even move in there.
So let's talk about that. And this is just one of the schemes that Brad was just mentioning. Okay, so everything in yellow here is probably pavers, or if you've been to Tunnel Tops at the Presidio, or we've just installed a big outdoor dining area at Just and Siena. Same, and you can actually see it on the bike trail between St. Helena and Calistoga. That is rated accessibility surfaces. People can walk on it, roll on it, and everything in yellow here, even if it's a driveway or protected by bollards, certainly walk into your front door. And there's a lot of greenery in and around. Now, a play field like that doesn't have a pathway through it, but it's also not a forest of trees. Something like this in front of the town hall, the historic grammar school, would have a lot of greenery, maybe lawn and maybe more something functional. But everything in these schemes has a way to get around. There's no gardens there's no scheme around this thing that would ever be mistook as an arboretum or some reinvention of a wild land. Does that help?
Yeah, I'll add just the term Woonerf, which I think I
had to get it in there somewhere tonight.
I don't know if you had heard it before when I introduced it, and I think one important thing when you talk about access is truly fire access, and I think it's an important part of the conversation, and also when you're moving into your house and things like that. So again, when you go to Europe, it's different, but now we have codes that say you got to have 14 feet or 18 feet or what have you. But those access roads can be Woonerfs, which the Dutch term in essence means these are multi-purpose roads that prioritize pedestrians. I mean, it's really a pedestrian road, but a fire truck can drive on it because you need those things. So I think that's another piece when you think about open space. The term Woonerf was intended to solve some access problems from a code perspective, but just to provide a really walkable neighborhood.
One of the absolute principles of this project is that the car is a guest on the site. That's a principle from the design. In either one of the two schemes that we're moving forward with, the response that we got from residents, and they said it in many different ways, I don't want a parking lot. I don't want to see cars. I don't want to walk next to cars. I don't want fast cars going through here. I don't want a new street. And we showed them more pictures of places that, like this picture, this is a classic Wooners. And so many of the yellow spaces, Commissioner, are actually just paving, and you can see it in the new paving that's right in front of the farm stand. The water goes right through it. It doesn't have to have massive stormwater management, and it keeps the roots healthy, et cetera.
Myrna, did you have a comment?
A couple of questions before we get into anything too detailed. Okay, so the walking paths that you've been describing, would that be bike accessible as well? I'm a bike rider.
Yes.
Just wondering. It's wide enough for a bike. It's safe enough. Would be safe enough for a
Bike, golf carts, all those things.
Okay. The other thing I was surprised, and I was asking Samantha today about, you have a pool in this design? You have a...
We've shown a number of pools and a number of designs where pools could be built.
Okay.
I think it's in a different category from like the dog park, which I think I'd get in a lot of trouble if we didn't show like, hey, yeah, that's where a dog park can absolutely work. A dog park is in a different planet in terms of financial maintenance costs. But there are a number of places, and we've shown it here in the scheme specifically for the parks, for your commission to see that yes, there are places where a pool, not an Olympic-sized pool, but a pool could be added, especially if it was connected to something like a fitness
center. I agree with that. And in terms of the scheme, the dog park, is it the same, maybe not literally dimensions, but it is the same square footage, or I'm not sure.
It's within 10%. I haven't actually measured sort of the pieces. I think it's a little longer. One of the suggestions from many residents or appointments is we want it in the shade. We want more shade, and the dog park in the summer was just really exposed in the heat of the day.
So, but approximately the same amount of square footage. And then the last question was about the community garden. Right now, it's a very small space. Were you planning to expand that space, or is it pretty much similar to the square footage that
I think, first of all, I'm calling it a farm stand garden, and the reason for that is that, it's going to be managed by volunteers, but the produce will be distributed, sold through the farm stand, so that it isn't a perception that you're going to rent out plots and grow your own food and those sorts of community garden types. Yeah, I think, the other thing, having experience with those types of functions, like truthfully, I've walked the site with Peter Jacobson, and there's a lot of areas we can grow food. I mean, it doesn't have to be confined to just that space. Like there's areas, and you could see it even integrated into the Wooners and such. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for the growth of that. We did expand it, just so you know, and if you kind of look at it, it's hard to see it right now, but it will go all the way to where that dirt is. So it's bigger than the one that was there before. And I think everything to me, especially that we did in the interim, is all going to be based on the success of the next 2 years. And I think whether it's the farm stand or whether it's the fitness center, like if the community supports it, like we'll expand it or we'll improve it. But if we're feeling like, hey, you know what, maybe this wasn't the right thing, then this is where we have an opportunity to do something different. That's why it was interim. But and I just want to say on the pool, you said especially. I will say in Sam's presence, only if the fitness center the town will not run a pool. We will help build a pool potentially, but we won't run a pool. So if the fitness center is operating, and I do think there's this issue, where you look at how much it costs to run a pool, not just the lifeguards, but some people want it at 85, some people want it at 82. So, like how much do you heat the pool? At least in my view, this is a special need that needs to be funded or at least supported by the people that use it. And a lot of times fitness centers subsidize pools. So I do think we have to get into the economics of the pool, I guess is my point. And it can't just be like, oh, okay, we're going to subsidize it just because we have 20 people in town that like to swim laps, because that will mean, those are expensive laps. So we're going to have a conversation, and I think it has to be integrated into Yountville Fit. And I do feel like Yountville Fit's going to be successful, but that's how I would approach the pool, just so you know. It's more about running it than it is building it.
I agree with that. Okay, thank you very much.
Vince, did you have anything?
I think I have a few things. First, a compliment. To staff, a compliment, but also to the team, to the project team. There's a lot of faith and confidence in connection with what you say and what we hear. And it just seems like a lot of thought, energy, and effort's gone into it. The public process is really, really hard sometimes. And I think you're absolutely right to always start with, here's what it was and here's why we bought it. And so here's where we're at, just as much as possible, because the minute you think that everybody understands that, there's somebody new. That's like, wait a second. So I think that's really wise as you continue to go down this road. A couple of things. So it seems to me that the parking in this model only, but if parking is going to be centralized, then there's kind of frontage and facade. And so I'm curious about whether you guys have contemplated that clearly where people get out of their cars and walk towards either their units or the gym or town hall or whatever it is, that they kind of know that this is the town of Yountville. There's some kind of branding there, maybe. I don't know. I'm just curious. And then also the idea that we had been kicking around kind of the emergency megawatt thing, and I'm wondering whether you guys are going to cover parking or at least prepare for the potential to cover parking and have panels or whatever you might need, because that seems like a lot of space that could be a multi-use space over and above just parking. And if you're not contemplating it now, then it becomes cost prohibitive down the road. And then finally, with respect to the pool, Brad, do you foresee the town kind of investing in like a model and square footage and a pool and gates and everything, that whether this operation continues to provide the recreational activities that we highly value, even if this operation is unsuccessful at doing so, and we know that the town's not going to be interested in necessarily that line of work, do you foresee packaging it as something that you could put out for RFP or something like that in the event this entity?
It's funny. In my previous job, we actually did contract the pool. And I can't remember if we did an RFP or not, but we had to pay the contractor, I think it was $300,000 a year to operate the pool. So it wasn't like, you can't make money on a pool, unless you're, I don't know, like literally like churning through swim clubs and water polo tournaments. I mean, I think even in that case, so it wouldn't be available to the public if you're making money. It just would be rented out on a constant basis. So it's hard to do an RFP for things that lose money, because it's like you're always, but there are people, that potentially could do that. But I think the right idea is like, hey, it's part of the fitness center. I also know, and I think you'll hear, some rumblings soon about, other pools that I'm hearing different things about that may be available to the public. So I think the pool is, one, it's you see it here as a placeholder. I don't think it's like a critical decision for us to give direction on. I think we've definitely heard people. You heard me say like, hey, we could help build it, but we're not going to operate it. So it needs to sustain itself from an operating standpoint. That means, to me, would be through a membership program. So, if you're a member of Yountville Fit, you want to be part of the swim club, you're probably going to have to pay more. They're going to have to figure out that and how they're going to pay the bills. So that's that. On the energy side, yes, we are looking at, solar both on the buildings and within the parking lots. There's trade-offs to those things. I actually had meetings today with Schneider Electric, which is the company that we walked the site with this microgrid guy came in from Texas. So there was like their expert, and we talked about it. We've talked about a number of things, including this idea of connecting the Commons, Bartisono, and the community center as kind of this microgrid that can work together to to basically manage loads, if you will. So there's a lot of cool ideas in the future, and I definitely am not losing sight of that. Because to your point, like what did we say today? We want to future-proof it. That was the term. So that if there's like something in the future, like we don't want to like constrain ourselves now because we put ourselves in a box. So those are all, I think, good comments. But yeah, I think right now, for this group, unless there's more questions, I feel like the first bullet was the ball field. And I think that's probably, and through you, the chair, I don't know if there were other clarifying questions, but I would ask you to kind of come back to, because we could talk about housing and parking and sustainability all day, but obviously as the PRAC, and I know some people are wanting to make use of their tickets, again, through however you want to facilitate it, I think that's where I want to make sure when we go back to council, like, hey, here's what PRAC said about the ball fields. If there are other things that are related to the Park and Rec master plan that you had talked about, like, hey, I don't know, bocce ball or whatever other programs or I guess recreational uses, those are things we should we should hear from now. So go ahead, Chair.
So Vince has one more.
Yeah, just to follow. First of all, I didn't want to give anyone the impression that I was advocating for the swimming pool. It just kind of came up, and I was just curious about what the package was to future-proof the project. And then now I'll just talk about what my thoughts really are. I'm not sure I'm in a position yet to advocate for kind of an exclusive use for the ball diamond. I don't think I'm personally not ready for the ball diamond. I don't think I can do that yet. I'm not sure that I could. The other kind of thing that you brought up that made me think, I don't see any backyards. So I think in order to understand what the public space accessibility is in terms of what our purview is, the open space, the availability, I think it's easier to just say, well, what's not there? And I don't see a lot of footprint for these units that would be their own, open space in theory. I see open space for the community and the town, and the units are just the units. So we're not going to be able to encroach into those footprints. It would be impossible. So I think that's a good way for me to look at it, because it expands, to your point, the European model, but it expands the idea that, no, you could put a tile out and sunbathe if you were inclined to do that, But that's all I have. Thank you very much for the presentation. Thanks for the clarification.
Sure.
But to your point, you're putting out the towel, but it's not in a backyard.
That's correct.
Everybody understands that.
Right.
There is no private space here other than the building proper. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's a couple of principles. Number one, there are no private enclosed garages anywhere on this parcel. There are. It's the idea. Most of the garages, myself mine included, around town and around many towns in California are filled with storage, boxes and Christmas decorations and things that you're moving in and out of your life. And that's a very, very expensive thing to build. And very early on, because of the vision, was outdoor spaces, quality, walkable things, all the amenities. But being able to store stuff, even if it's your own car, is not important. Obviously, it's in many, many structures around Yountville. But for this project, it was so far down the list that it was eliminated, as was private backyards, because you can't obviously give it to everybody. And as long as everybody had the ability to share some shared spaces, even though they were public, some of the wonderful pictures that you saw, that was more valuable, so that everyone is actually sharing some of these subsets.
Okay, so before we get to the ball field, I have a couple general comments about where we are in the process. And a lot of it is informed by one of the dinners I went to, where we actually had people that live in affordable housing units and talk to us about their life, about what they want for recreation, what they want for amenities, and what they want for transportation. And what I heard pretty clearly was that the amenities Yountville has are amenities for people that are older and mostly retired. That their lives are mostly out of town. They're mostly out of town in their cars to take their child to play organized sport in St. Helena or Napa. That one car is not enough, that 2 cars are necessary at least per household with children because you've got to take your kid to the doctor. So anyway, I just want a reality check here because I love the idea. I like what I see. But as we think about the residents that might take advantage of this wonderful thing we're building, is that I'm hearing from them that Yountville's a great place, but it's not a place where they can live the life that they're wanting to live. So that's one thought that I have. Another thought has to do with the idea of these parking orchards. If you have, so the story, Ashley, my wife, and I, we were both in the wine business before retiring. And we were always surprised by people that worked on our bottling lines and their cars. Their cars were gorgeous and new and expensive. And when I think of parking a gorgeous, expensive car underneath a tree with birds in it, especially if it's a fruit tree, then it has rats and birds. That's not a big success right there. So I'd like you to think a little bit about that. So those are my general comments about where we are, and then I'm happy, unless there are other comments, to move to discussions about the baseball field. Anybody? Seeing none, you mentioned, Vince, that you weren't ready to stand behind a standalone baseball field. Did you have any other thoughts you wanted to share on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Only that we have to talk about it, but I don't think it's the highest and best use, but that's all I can say.
Yeah. Myrna, what were your thoughts?
There's a lot of emotion about among some people in our community about the baseball field, but realistically, I don't think we have children who play baseball here. We have. You mentioned at our meeting the other day that there's 30 children under the age of 18 in the town of Yountville. I'm not sure how many of them are even eligible to play baseball here in the town of Yountville. So as much as I've thought about this, I don't feel that we should exclude housing at the cost of having a baseball field. The one thing I would like to say, and this is almost parenthetical, the baseball field right now is named after a fellow named Dick Kaneshiro. He was a coach many years ago. I didn't know him personally, but I think there's a family in town that is very connected to Dick Kaneshiro. If we do dispense of the field, I would like to suggest that we consider something to honor his legacy, because I think that that would be a special way to continue his name in some sort of a public venue. I think it would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Lorene, did you have comments specific to the baseball field?
I do. This is pretty dense housing, and we're hoping that younger families will be moving into this. So I think our demographics would change a bit. So we may have kids coming in that would play baseball. I don't want to discount it because it is such an integral part of our community. But I'm with my coworkers here that it's a tough one. But I'm hopeful that with the new housing that we will have a a lot younger audience. But yeah.
Go ahead, Myrna.
I understood from the presentation that you made a couple of days ago that a lot of this housing inventory will be studios and one-bedroom apartments. I don't know what percentage that is relative to a unit that would actually house a family, but studios and one-bedroom apartments, the orientation is workforce housing, and it's younger individuals, really, or couples. But in terms of how you're going to parse that out, I mean, what is your expectation that there would be units? What percentage of the units would you say would be like 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom? I mean, it seems like a majority would be very small units.
Well, I'll try to answer that. I think, first of all, the Measure S funding that is one of really the only funding source that we have that is committed to housing comes from hotel tax, right? So it comes from the hotels. So when you look at that and you think of hospitality service workers, we talk about there's roughly as many service workers in town as there are residents, right? So if you want to break that down and start to get into percentages, I think the need is definitely for, people that are, as you said, either, starters or couples. I don't think, I think family housing creates a whole nother set of issues. But to answer the unit mix question, which is the question you're asking, I think the other reality of what we build is, assuming we control it and we don't just sell out to a big developer, is that we will phase this, right? There will be a first phase. We've talked about kind of how this could get phased. And that's the other beauty of having smaller buildings, so that this isn't one big building that we have to figure out how to build at one time. So I think, we'll do more research and more, demographic sort of data. But I think we'll come out of the gates, trying to really accommodate the service workers in town, which will be more studios than ones. And if that fills up and there's a waiting list, we'll probably build more of it, I think that's where you have to kind of follow the trends to some extent. So I don't think right now I would tell you like, hey, 20% of it's 2s and, 60s 1s and 20 studios, because I think we will come, over time to understand it. But I do keep going back to Measure S. I still keep going back to, there is great demand for service workers, the long commutes, all the things that factor in. So, yeah, I think that'll be how the design is. And that also kind of gets to the backyard point you made earlier. Like, I think that, if you create common areas, I don't want to call them dormitories, but we've all lived on campus. You know how that works. Like, people don't live in their dorm room. They live wherever the library or the bar or the whatever, the rec room, all of those things are critical. You brought up rooftops last time. We've talked about that. Like, there can be common areas that are not only for the residents, for the public. That's what I think is the long answer to kind of where you get into the unit mix question. And I do think it's like, to me, obvious that we need, because I think the other mega trend that everyone's talking about is, more people are living alone. So this not only applies to service workers, truthfully. I mean, you can get into seniors and other populations. I used to talk about sailors in my previous job because we had the Navy base. Like, there's a lot of demand for smaller housing because I think that 30% of people now are living alone. That's bigger, yeah. So, yeah, you don't want to build 2 and 3 bedrooms, when you have this huge pent-up demand for these smaller units. And I think, obviously most of Yountville is already 2, 3, 4-bedroom units. So I think our priority is starting with meeting the demand of, really our service workers under that Measure S funding source. But when you do that, I think you accommodate, again, a lot of other needs. Is that a...
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Carrie and I have 4 kids. We definitely are, let's just say on the family side of things. Now we only have 1 left at home, and we're like, wow, the house is too big. So we've gone through that strange kind of bell curve. I picked this up because that's a 4-plex. We know that this is 4 1-bedroom units with a studio in the top 3rd floor. We also know that it's really important in terms of the design standards that we're laying out for the town, that this could also be 2 3-bedroom units. The way that the parking works out is that there's one parking space for every bedroom, which is actually the building code in California. Yountville actually doesn't have a minimal parking, but we know that if you can't park the site, no matter if it's a 3-bedroom house and one's going to Napa and one's going to St. Helena, and we know that's a reality. We don't want to sort of sell anybody into the future piece. It's important to design that house so that for one 10-year section, whoever's operating that house, it can be a 4 or 5 unit house. And then 10 years later, the bottom floor can be a 3-bedroom house, family house, and still 2 units, and all of a sudden everything is kind of changing, which is actually how houses always happened. And you can see it in Old Town. Whole big houses have been broken up into 1s and 2s and parceled off, and the garage is on someone else's parcel. So that's a really important piece, and it's one of the reasons why we're leaving the garages off of the thing, because it's very difficult to redo a garage into something that's habitable. Yeah,
and I'm going to say the last thing here, because I think one of the things you mentioned, Lorraine, I've heard a number of times, which is like, okay, all of a sudden, if we build this, we're going to have families back then, we're going to have Little League, right? So I would resist the temptation, I called it the smoke of nostalgia, to think that a project like this is somehow going to send us back in time, right? The trends are too great. We can provide housing for people that need it, but it's not going to all of a sudden like, oh, we're going to need a school again, and let's get back to where we used to be. So that's what I would advise you based on, we're talking about the field right now. And I think that the last thing I'll say, because I think we should have reported, we did do a year deal or a year use agreement, I should call it, with the Little League. This will be an interesting year. So, even though you're giving guidance, and I think what we're hearing, at least I'm hearing generally, is like there's higher and better uses for the field, housing being the preeminent one. But this gets into stretching the open space too, and like having, more dispersed open space rather than just a big field, so we can have more room along Hopper Creek and more room along Yount and Fennell, so that it feels more integrated. But we'll see how this year goes, right? Because last year, it was sort of we bought the school in the middle of the league. It was kind of like half league. I mean, it was a strange year. So we'll see how this year goes. Like, are they going to recruit kids? How many kids are from Yountville? We'll be able to watch that. And the nice thing about what you saw with the phase, a phased approach, is, we could conceivably, continue on a year-by-year basis to have a Little League for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, right? As we, think about how the housing gets integrated. And at that point in 3 years, if all of a sudden there's this big resurgence, like, we don't have to build the next phase, right? So I think there's flexibility. So I do think, like, what we're hearing, at least I'm hearing, is like, okay, continue to plan in this regard, like as we get entitlements and go through planning so we can phase it out. But let's see how it goes over the next, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Because we were, at least Sam and I, because I hadn't dealt with, I thought we were like on life support like twice. We weren't sure, was there actually going to be a league? And obviously if there's no league, it sort of answers the question for you. But I think that's something you can monitor, and we can not have to make a hard decision. But I think in terms of the entitlement or the planning process, like that's what I heard. So I'm seeing nodding heads. So I think we can go back to the council in essence say that. But I do feel like we have flexibility in the future.
I'd just like to clarify, I was at the council meeting where that item came up, and I want to be clear. The agreement, the 1-year agreement, was made with an entity called Yountville Little League. Is that correct?
Yes.
It's Yountville Baseball is their official 501c3 organization, and then they provide a Little League. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, because there were some comments from the DS that gave me a little bit of question, because Napa Little League came up, and I know you made the point that last year it was an expansion league, but this year it is clearly going to be run by Yountville Baseball.
Well,
last year, go ahead.
I think it'll be the same model. So they are, because Napa fills excuse me, I have a tickle, then they're able to play in another town.
The Napa Little League last year was oversubscribed, or they had to turn away 20 kids. So people got organized quickly to provide Yountville baseball. I call Yountville Little League, but so it was through the same organization. But at that time, again, we were in the process of acquiring the school. We didn't have a use agreement. The school district didn't have a use agreement. There was no formal, insurance, all the stuff that we have now for this year. So they were able to at least provide insurance and show that they had a charter. And now they're going to do tryouts and see if they can recruit kids, right? And that's sort of the next test, is how many kids sign up. And last year, at least, that was partially dependent on Napa being overfilled or oversubscribed.
And my understanding is that is another repeat of that currently, that Napa is oversubscribed.
Okay, so I haven't weighed in on the baseball field specifically, but I concur with what everyone has said, and it is, to me, having been involved in participatory democracy, it is unfortunate that entities don't make their presence known in meaningful ways at public meetings, because that's the only way, and I've said it when we did have one baseball person come, it's the only way that the administrative organizations can make informed decisions. So it's really important to show up. So I'll get off my soapbox, and if there's no comments more on baseball field, we can move on to Parks and Rec elements in the presented comments. Do anyone want to comment about that?
I think one piece of some guidance that we would welcome from all of you, or one or both of you, or all four of you, is we keep telling everybody, and to your point, Commissioner, we repeat the same thing. This is part of the million cups of coffee methods that we use. We just tell the same story over and over again. And if you're telling the truth, you don't have to remember what you said the last time, because it's a really simple story to tell, even though it takes a long time to tell it in some meetings. It's a really remarkable place in the center of town. And we're trying to, number one, it's not a project. It's not a housing project. That's what we heard from like the first hour, the first meeting. Like, I don't want a massive building with a huge parking lot, stuck over in the corner. Like, are you going to do that, or aren't you? And we could probably have done that in 3 or 4 stories and had a parking lot, and there's the Little League field, and there's this other thing, and there's the gym, and sort of like, and you would have driven by and said like, well, they just sort of threw all the different pieces that everybody kind of like, screamed about, and there it is. We're trying to design a neighborhood that fits and is integrated into the rest of Yountville. And I'm not talking just about Old Town across Yount Street, but Hopper Creek and the Seventh-day Adventist neighborhood across the actual creek itself. And this part of, you have some workforce housing right here in Arroyo Grande, and the ability to start making a neighborhood and having a park, literally a dog park in this case, where everybody is actually starting to, for these folks to actually have a community for the first time, instead of just kind of stuck into the corner of the Bardesano property. So the guidance that we're looking, that is helpful for us, is that yes, the Little League field is definitely shown and a potential for future housing, but we're actually leaving enough room for the fields. We're not showing 2. And we're showing an extensive amount of parkland and town greens, and the elimination of the parking lot. And when everyone starts concentrating for us, like, what are you taking away? Well, I want the headline to be, they're taking away all the parking lots on Yount Street, not they're taking away the Little League field, because we're actually not showing the 75 RENA number the removal of any Little League field. We're actually showing the removal of parking from the front of the property where the school had it to the middle of the property where residents would need it. Does that make sense? And for us, we're trying to repeat and repeat over and over again. We're not taking the Little League field away. We're actually, I mean, that's definitely a potential down the road for multi-phasing. But what we're doing is taking a lot of the concrete and asphalt off of the major street, the identity of certainly in front of Town Hall, but putting the parking where it needs to be, which is, when you see the Wooner, somebody who can conveniently walk and get groceries in and out, and little kids can bike back and forth across the parcel without, parents worrying about them being run over.
I actually do have a question. What do you envision that former parking lot in front of right here, Town Hall? What do you envision that to look like?
I think the historic driveway, the drop-off of the school, probably will be an element of it, but mostly I think it could be for functions, and I think for a lot of more active spaces. But really, it's a continuation of some of these vineyards and some of the setback and some of the garden experience of walking or biking or even driving down Yount Street, so that you're not seeing cars coming back and forth. And this is really just mostly a green area, because in this scheme, the town owns it. You can park. Everybody who's parking can enter the building from behind it. So to me, this is it's a landscape project that has yet to be sort of done. But what we do know is that it doesn't have to be parking.
Well, but it's funny. It feels like we always agree it's not true. And I think there's areas where, this is where phasing is important. But I will point out, if you walked in the front door, you see we're working on the landscape today. And it'll be ready, and so it'll be a big improvement. The other thing, it's interesting, and you're all locals, and you note that there's actually more people that park in our lot in the weekends than they do during the weekdays, right? Because obviously there's demand for employee parking throughout the town. So, and I've been in parking wars my whole career. So getting rid of parking, is a big deal. So I think, I do envision, and Brennan has a very good way of convincing me of things like, well, you should get married in front of Town Hall. I'm like, well, you can go get married at the community center, or, get married at all these things. So, I feel like we're being very specific because we have to, and people want specificity. And also, when we get into the regulatory process of planning and entitlements, it's important to max things out, because you can only go less, you can't go more. And this is where parking is always a hard conversation, because really, how many parking spaces do you need? I like the front of Town Hall. I don't think, anyway, he and I have debated this, so I don't want to do it publicly. I think it's definitely it could be better, but I'm not focused there. I think, as we talk about open space, again, the ball field giving us this opportunity to create a much more, because I also feel, one thing I will say that, along Hopper Creek, that to me is obvious is, a Arroyo Grande crowds the creek. When you pass a Hopper Creek Trail on Fennell, you feel like you're kind of invading someone's property, right? We don't want to do that. So we want to have that green space, and if we don't have the baseball field, truthfully, we can kind of slide it back, and then all of a sudden, people can put their beach towels out next to the creek on a sunny day, and it doesn't feel like you're in someone's front yard, right? There's no way you could do that in front of Arroyo Grande. You feel like you're walking like you're trespassing, right? So those are, to me, more important. And that's why the dog park's where it is. That's where I think, as we get into what we do with the parking lot in front of the commons, that to me is a parking lot that is just okay, we got to do something here. This is, so to me, it's I guess priorities, right? And I do agree it could be better, and I do drink his Kool-Aid. And I think it's like, yeah, I mean, if we had people were moving stuff all around, but, I always do have a little cash register in my head going, okay, what can we really afford and what are our priorities? And I also think the last thing I wanted to say, because I'm looking at the list and you spent 2 years, Sam, doing the Park and Rec Master Plan. Like, it was this great document I walked into, and you all had worked so hard on it. But I would tell you 10 years ago, pickleball wouldn't even been talked about, right? Pickleball wasn't even a thing. Now pickleball's like the thing. So what's the next thing, right? So let's also keep our minds open to whatever's next, so that we're not so specific that it's like, here's the plan, and if you don't do that, like, you're lying. You told us you were going to take away the parking in the front yard. And I'm like, okay, well, let's all back off and like realize that this is a vision and it will adapt over time. Because there are things that I see, and I mentioned padel ball, like as I was traveling, like all of a sudden all these people are playing padel ball, which is like pickleball on, it's a new version of pickleball. Like, okay, is this now all of a sudden, in 10 years, like we're all going to be talking about that? I don't know. But I do know that, we have to be flexible, I guess that's my point. And we also have to prioritize. So that's my soapbox.
Okay, so let me get clarification on one point that you just made. I'm a big advocate for the trail along the creek. The more setback, the better, as far as I'm concerned. But you made the statement, correct me if I'm wrong, that by removing the ball field, we're allowed, it allows us to have more green space. But this is a phased project. It's already going to be built before we potentially get rid of the ball field. So how does that square?
Yeah. Well, again, I think when we do the entitlements, we're going to be doing the whole project. So that's going to look at the total number of units, the total square footage, et cetera, et cetera. We're looking at a model where, Brendan just sort of stacks stuff on top of the baseball field. I'm looking at this model right now, and I'm saying, if we were to really sort of move stuff around, when he did that, I would have probably taken a few of the buildings off the corner where the dog park is, to kind of loosen that corner. I also think that the view corridor down Weber is really important, with the idea that, from the Vine Trail to Hopper Creek, you should be able to make that visual connection. And, however we allow bikes and peds to meander over there. Those are the things that, again, like, I guess if I don't want to move the stuff around, but I would kind of just move all that stuff a little bit right there, into the field, and then soften the edges. And then, Hopper Creek, to me, again, the Fennell, all of the edges, which to me, and I do like the idea, which, here, I'll get up and preach now. The, what I call the hourglass, which is where I really liked this idea of, this hourglass, which is sort of this, right? And so if you move back to whatever, let's get rid of that building, let's get rid of this building. So all of a sudden, like, you see this, this gets a little softer. But then as you walk through the site, from both parking lots, you can get to the center, right? And you can go through the center as a beautiful thing. But this hourglass of like, okay, you can go to each corner of the site without walking through a parking lot. And I think that sort of gives you, again, if you start being able to move some of the density here, like, it frees that up so that these edges and this sort of whatever you want to call the center, it just gives you a lot more space, right? So that the wooners and all those things don't feel constricted. And I think ultimately it'll just be a much better project, and you'll get whatever the unit is, 100 units, 72 units, whatever we decide. You've got a lot of space to play with on the edges if you integrate the ball field for the housing. Fair?
Yeah.
Okay, did anyone have any other comments on the Parks and Rec elements in the presented comments? I do want to call everyone's attention to what's been referred to before, the Town of Yountville Public Amenities and Locations diagram. I think that's very helpful to look at what amenities we have and what is potentially unique to the commons, and going down That list, unique, is the wellness center, the dog park, the farm stand, and the farm stand garden. But there are also lawn area, fitness classes, playground, that sort of thing. So I think unless anyone has specific concerns or comments about things unique to the Commons site, I think we can say that the table pretty well summarizes it.
Just, if I may.
Please.
So I did want to piggyback on Commissioner David's comment. There's something that's inviting about recognizing the history. And so you'll have new residents there that aren't from the town. And so if the town is able to put its mark in the center of the center, like you mentioned, or some version of that, then that would be pretty helpful to what your comment was earlier. What really is the accessibility? Because I remember what was a little off-putting for me was, and I think it was you, Mr. Chairman, a ball field is a beautiful thing, and it's a beautiful design, and I love them. But there's something about it that just says stay off, right? So I liked your comment, and I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to mention, Myrna, that, and I know you all pay attention, but we did get direction on the Legacy Trail, which you may have paid attention to, and I do think Dick Kaneshiro, there's already a plaque. Clearly, if the farm stand is working well, which I do anticipate this is going to be like a success, there's an opportunity to pay homage to him and his family, not only through the snack shack, but, I could see the dog park easily, like, keeping home plate and, like, having, there could be some homage that we could talk about for the field, so that people understand, just like what we did with the memory wall with the kids' handprints. Like, those things are important, right? And I think we can definitely integrate that. So as the Legacy Trail evolves, I'll make a note that Dick Kaneshiro, is something that should be recognized.
The one thing I'd add, especially around Parks and Rec, is that one of the principles that we're using is really the idea of outdoor rooms, and not always in terms of recreation, like around like a ball field, but every time you circle or enclose a space, you create one more space. This is a good addition. Here's Arroyo Grande. Here's the field. Here's this neighborhood, actually very visible across the creek, especially this time of year with the oak leaves down. And all of a sudden you're seeing kind of a town green with Fennell coming through here. This is a brand new physical space in Yountville that's never been there. And these are existing buildings, but by being able to kind of enclose this and complete the tree line here and a public space like the dog park and the farm stand, that's a brand new recreational space. And that could be just a place where soccer practice happens and lacrosse practice and maybe some baseball hits and things like that. All of it very functional. That's just as functional as this little outdoor room or whatever happens over here. So we're trying to put as many alternative outdoor rooms that can be connected by residents, maybe some that don't even live here on the Commons and have lived here for a long time, that all of a sudden everyone here has, well, we've talked to a few of those. They're very used to some of these open views around here, and the ability to maybe keep them and enhance them with some of the more amenities is also, we're trying to add to things. I know it's scary to lose things like views, but if we can enhance views, and especially some of the quiet things against Hopper Creek, that's what we're trying to add. We're not trying to just protect things. We're trying to actually add real spaces that have never actually happened in Yountville.
All right. So we've talked about the baseball field. We've talked about the Parks and Rec elements in the presented concepts, and then consistency with Parks and Recreation Master Plan and the general plan as it relates to parks and open space. Commissioners have any comment on that last item? It's kind of a complicated one.
Well, I just want to say that the key items that are prioritized in the master plan are already being incorporated. So as far as that goes, I think we've covered a lot of the key things that people expressed interest in the survey.
Any other comments? Okay. I didn't hear disagreement on anything in particular or feel a need that we have to make a vote or stand on anything. So if there's nothing else on item 7, then I think we'll move to item 8, and thank you for your time.
And thank you for your, obviously, your involvement and your comments. I would also encourage you, Chair, to come to the March 4th meeting. Feel free to speak. You know, we'll memorialize whatever we can within the staff report, but I know you'll be there.
You're right.
But as you know, I also want to encourage all the chairs, you know, of each of the 3 committees to come and you know, and have an opportunity to speak. So, however that is in your mind, based on what you heard this evening, I think that's going to be an important part of March 4th.
Thank you. Okay, so staff informational reports. I don't see Resolva here, but Public Works Department general update.
Yeah, I'll just give a brief update on a couple of things that have to do with parks. So Yountville Community Park, the shade sail project continues. So the poles have gone up, and then they actually do real-time measurements to ensure that the fabric is correct. So that's in production right now, and we anticipate that wrapping up mid-February. And then we will move forward with cleanup of the area. So there's been some impacts to the existing surfaces in some of the picnic areas, so that'll all get cleaned up and as we move forward with the project. So I look forward to wrapping that up and sharing that with you at our March meeting. And then at the community center with Public Works, we're just continuing with the planning phase of the outdoor kitchen and barbecue upgrades that we were looking at. Our goal is to hopefully have that completed by May, so I'll keep you updated on that as well. I can also talk briefly about the commons. So obviously, you know, lots of work has wrapped up there. I believe the landscaping work is about 95% complete on the frontage. Yountville Fit opened on January 6th, which is really exciting. Small punch list of items that we're finishing up there. Schmidt Hall, which was named Schmidt Hall at the council meeting in December. The exterior updates to that facility as far as the wood facade to kind of match the community center and staining, that all is being wrapped up this week. And then, as you know, the dog park has been ongoing open and just small repairs here and there, but pretty successful overall. A lot of extensive lands work has gone on that field as far as the irrigation system is very time consuming, but we think we're there, and work on the ball field to get it up and running for end of February, which is when they'll begin practices, is in progress right now. Brad did mention the council approved a 1-year use agreement with Yountville Baseball for the potential of a spring and fall league, and so we'll see how that progresses. And then, as Brad mentioned, the farm stand, we're looking at a spring opening. The majority of the work from the town side has been complete, with the exception of some cleanup, just mostly around the baseball viewing areas. And now hoops will be coming in and starting some interior improvements, getting furniture going, and all of that. So we see that progress forward. I can try to answer any questions that you have as it relates to Public Works.
Commissioners, any questions or comments?
Just on the entire report when she's done.
Okay. After my part? Okay. All right.
Right. Then
move
if
on
you
to
would
Parks and
please
Rec.
move on to Parks and Rec.
Okay, so briefly, we obviously wrapped up a very successful holiday season of events in December. After the last one, we all breathe a big sigh of relief. It's a fast and furious a series of events. We just wrapped up 2 full weeks of winter camp at the Yountville Commons with 60 kids each week. And then we started our winter spring session of classes this Monday. We have our largest number of golden ticket members to date, which as of today was 208. We have not reached 200, so that's pretty spectacular. And we have them registered into 45 different classes and programs. I didn't run the actual number on how many individual registrations that is yet, but I'll look forward to reporting that in March. You may have seen coming up, we're going to premiere a new Mardi Gras Le Carnaval parade in Yountville on March 1st in celebration. So we're really working hard to get that going, getting businesses on board. Then Yountville, the Hotels and Inns of Yountville, which the not Yountville version of TID, has sponsored with some financial assistance to kind of help community groups and businesses get involved. So the first 20 proposals for floats can get up to $1,000 stipend or grant to assist with whether it's supplies or running a vehicle or even staffing. So we're trying to really create some incentives there. But we're having a lot of fun internally planning for that. It should be a really fun day. And then we'll have some excursions coming up in the spring as you know, with all of our other things happening. And we're starting to plan for summer now, which is really exciting. And I just wanted to point out, we do our new team members, Caitlin Huss, who's overseeing arts, events, and marketing, and then Rose Lopez overseeing our adult programs, and also some events have been on for 3 months now. It's going really, really well. If you visit the historic, the pop-up museum that's opening tomorrow morning, Caitlin put a lot of work into that, and I couldn't be more proud of the outcome. So hopefully you'll have a chance to stop by and take a look at that. But yeah, at full staffing, it's pretty incredible what we're able to achieve, and I'm excited to just see it continue. So happy to answer any Parks and Rec questions as well.
All right. Any questions or comments, commissioners?
Just overwhelming amount of work and chores and tasks. Always impressed with your entire operation. Of course, I want to add something to that. It seems to me that we're going to have a conversation about the necessity of maintenance. And so I imagine that you're contemplating some kind of analysis or survey related to what we're going to need additionally in terms of manpower, womanpower, to be respectful, to take care of things at the standard that you've set for the town. Along those lines, though, I was hoping that we would consider here agendizing an item to recognize some of your maintenance personnel who oftentimes don't get recognized for the work that they do outdoors. And it seems to me like there's been a lot more asks on them. So I don't want to develop too much on that right now other than just conceptually and ask through the chair that we place an item on the agenda for potentially exploring some sort of recognition for folks that oftentimes, I'm sure you recognize them, Stan, but in a more public way that they may or may not appreciate. That's all I have.
Yeah. I just wanted to add, I really appreciate your comments, and I'll pass those on for sure. When we purchased the facility, the Commons property, we did then budget to add a park maintenance worker, which started with the new fiscal year in July. So we do have one additional person, and then as the process keeps evolving and things develop and things change, I think we're always try to be in tune with that. Yeah, we have a pretty high standard of maintenance in our parks and facilities in Yountville, and our goal is to continue that on that site. And so, within the parameters of the money we had, a lot of internal staff time went into navigating how to get that field online and not brown and all of these things. But we're hoping that we're getting pretty close with having that to be in a manageable point. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, can I piggyback really quick? Because one, I want to say something. Sam said to me, we got back after the new year, and we had a nice first meeting, and obviously we all needed a little break. But then you said to me, you go, I'm really happy with my staff right now. And it was like an exhale, like happy, like I could see like the smile she has now. And so I do think like we're in a really good place in Park and Rec, likewise in Public Works. But one thing Sam failed to mention is we just promoted Jake King as the new Muni Ops Manager, is the term we use. So now, if you know Jake, he's been with the town 20-plus years, 20-ish years. So he is now the Larry job, if you remember Larry. So he's overseeing you know, we have now a full parks crew of 4, which is really useful because, you know, you do now have, you know, Leo and Manny that work as a pair and Max and Julian that work as a pair. So now Leo and Manny, who are more technical, they can go work on sprinklers and irrigation and projects while, you know, Max and Julian are keeping the parks nice. So having that redundancy has been huge, and that has then given Ryan and Juan the ability just to focus on facilities, which I know Sam appreciates because there's always, you know, there's always a big honey-do list with all the buildings and the facilities. So we're going to backfill Jake's position, which will add another, you know, body to the streets crews. But, you know, I'm exhaling too because it's been a year and a half to get us to a place where we have, you know, full staffing and great staffing too. I mean, it's not just full, but like really great people doing all these jobs. Cammy's another example, sitting there filling for, you know, Hillary while she's out on maternity leave. So I think we're hitting 25 like in a really good stride with staff, and we will pass that along. But I will tell you that they probably wouldn't want to come to a 6 o'clock meeting. So, you know, be careful what you ask for. They'd probably be like, oh, thanks a lot. You know, they go home at 3:30. But I do think maybe there's some way, and we have a kudos wall. We do very, very much try to appreciate our workers, but we'll pass it along. And if there's a way to do it, I think we're open to that. That's different than what we're already doing.
Okay, so I think I heard clear feedback on not having them show up at 6 o'clock or 7:30, but it's the thought that counts. Okay.
See them, say thank you.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so item 8 is now done. Item 9, commissioner comments and reports. Any? Okay, one of the things that came to my attention recently that I think we need to bring back to this group. I remember sitting here and listening to the former Public Works Director, Joe Tagliabashi, talk about the changes that had been made in the use of the herbicides, in particular for the parks. And then thanks to Rosalva and John Ferns, the current director, they did fill me in on what they're currently using. And what they're currently using, I mean, we used it in the vineyard all the time, but it is an organophosphate herbicide. And I know they probably have very good reason, because most of the things that Joe had mentioned, either clove oil or acetic acid-based, they really just don't work. But I just want to make sure that the public is aware and that we have thought thoroughly that we're choosing the best, safest herbicides, and that we don't leave a misconception that we're using clove oil and acetic acid, organic, quote, organic herbicides. And then I would also like, at the same time, any discussion of any kind of pesticides that are used in the parks, so that we just get that, make sure that we've dotted our I's and crossed our T's, that
absolutely.
We do that.
I'll talk with John and Rosalba about giving an update on that at the March meeting, and then discussion. So sharing what we're currently doing, and then discussing if there are changes that could be analyzed.
Great. Thank you for that. Since there are no other commissioner comments or reports, I think we need a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you both.
Got 1 more hour.